Talk show appearances are not performances. This is the first thing that is useful to understand about what Katt Williams did during a mid-2000s television appearance, because the thing he did only makes sense in relation to the format he departed from. A talk show appearance is a managed conversation. The host has been given in advance a card with the topics, the movie, the special, the project, the occasion that has brought the guest to the desk. The guest has been briefed by their publicist or their manager, or by their own accumulated experience of the format, about what the managed conversation is supposed to produce. A clip, if there is one, an anecdote, ideally one that has been field-tested on other appearances, or in the green room with the segment producer, whose job it is to assess which anecdotes play and which ones require context the television audience won't have. A punchline, if possible, that lands before the commercial break cue and leaves the host laughing in the manner that tells the audience at home that they have enjoyed what they have just seen. The format is not dishonest. It is the format for a reason. The reason being that a live studio audience and a running camera and a host who has 4 other guests to get through in the next 90 minutes does not leave a great deal of room for the kind of conversation that finds its own shape organically. The format does the shaping in advance so that the conversation can move through its 3 or 4 minutes of allotted time with the efficiency that television production requires. Katt Williams sat down at the talk show desk in the mid-2000s with the card in front of the host and the format in place and the segment producer in the wings with the commercial break cue ready. And then he went somewhere the card hadn't specified. Not confrontationally, not in the way that guests who are trying to make news go off script, simply in the way that a person does when they are saying something they actually think. And what they actually think turns out to be more interesting than what was written on the card. Nobody intervened. This is the part of the story that requires the most explanation because talk show production is built on intervention. The segment producer's primary function is to ensure that the conversation remains within the format that the production has organized itself around, and the tools for intervention are always available and always close. The commercial break can be moved. The host can be cued to redirect. The segment can be truncated to prevent the conversation from going further than the format supports. None of these interventions happened. The segment producer has described the specific moment of deciding not to intervene as a decision made on the basis of the room's response, not the studio audience's response in the managed sense, but the response of the people on the production who were in the most direct contact with the conversation as it was happening. The camera operators, the floor manager, the host who had abandoned the card and whose body language was communicating in the clearest possible way that the conversation was doing something the format was not designed to do, and that stopping it was not what the production needed to do. What the conversation was doing, in the deviation from the card, in the 4 minutes that the segment extended past its scheduled close without the commercial break cue, was producing the specific thing that talk show formats are designed to approximate, but rarely produce in practice: the quality of an actual exchange. 2 people in the same space at the same time, saying things they actually mean to each other, with a studio audience and a running camera as witnesses. The commercial break eventually came. The segment closed in the slightly extended, slightly disordered way that segments close when they have gone off the format and needed to be managed back onto a schedule. The card was set aside. The host said the things that hosts say at the close of a segment that has gone differently than planned, but has worked. And then the broadcast moved to the next segment, and the production resumed the pace that the format requires. To understand what Katt Williams said when he went off the card, It helps to understand what was on the card, what the planned version of the appearance was supposed to produce, and why the deviation from it was something other than simple disruption. The planned topics were the ordinary currency of mid-2000s comedy talk show appearances, the current project, the tour schedule, the material the host had been briefed to use as a starting point, and from which the conversation was supposed to develop in the direction of the anecdote the producer had flagged as the most television-compatible. Nothing wrong with any of it. These are the things that are on the card because they are the things the audience at home has reason to be interested in. They represent the intersection of the guest's professional life and the viewer's potential investment in it. What Katt Williams said instead was not unrelated to the card's subjects. It connected, in the specific way that the mind of a comedian connects things, from the professional context that the card represented, toward something more fundamental and harder to package. A perspective on the relationship between what the entertainment industry shows of a comedian and what the comedian actually is, and why those two things are less continuous than most people in the audience at home assume them to be. Not a complaint, not a controversy, a comic observation, but one that the card hadn't anticipated and that the format hadn't budgeted time for. The host's response was the most revealing thing that happened in the segment. Talk show hosts are trained to manage deviations from the format, to acknowledge the unexpected direction, insert a laugh if the deviation is light, redirect toward the card if the deviation is heavy, maintain the management of the conversation that the format requires. What this particular host did instead was lean in, not metaphorically, physically. The chair moved forward, the card was set down, the hands came off the desk. The body language shifted from managed conversation posture to something closer to actual interest, which is when the segment producer in the wings understood that the commercial break cue was going to be late. The talk show appearance was not remembered for the topics on the card. It was remembered for the 4 minutes that went off it. The clip that circulated afterward, in the specific way that clips circulated before the infrastructure of the Internet made circulation instant and permanent, which is to say, slowly, through the recommendation chains of people who had seen it and wanted others to see it, was the 4-minute deviation rather than the managed conversation the format had been built around. This tells something important about what talk show formats are actually producing and what they occasionally fail to produce. The format is an efficiency tool. It is very good at moving a guest through the presentation of their professional life in a way that serves the show's needs and the guest's needs and the audience's need for a coherent and watchable segment. What it is not always good at producing is the quality of exchange that the 4-minute deviation produced, the specific kind of interest that an audience gives to something that is happening rather than something that is being presented. What Katt Williams demonstrated in that segment is something his stand-up work had always demonstrated, but that talk show appearances rarely make available. The relationship between what he says and what he actually thinks is very short. Shorter than the format assumes. Shorter than most performers whose careers have reached a certain scale can afford. The managed conversation, for a comedian who works at the level of specific observation that his best material requires, is a format that creates drag, that slows the distance between thought and expression in ways that produce the managed version of the person rather than the actual one. The actual one was more interesting. The people who saw the segment that night, and the people who found the clip in the months and years after, understood this without needing it explained. The card was still on the desk when the segment ended, face down where the host had set it. 4 minutes that nobody planned for had turned out to be the only 4 minutes that mattered. Which is what happens when a comedian who works on a format sits down inside one and decides, for reasons that have nothing to do with strategy, to simply say what they actually think.